da, da.
Hello.
Hello.
So nice to see you all here this evening. Welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. I'm Cynthia Gorney, National Geographic writer, former faculty at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. A few reminders before we get started. Tonight's program is being recorded, so we kindly ask that you silence your phones, of course, for the program. We will make time for questions. So if you have any for Mary, please fill them out on the cards that were on your seats or through the chat on YouTube for any of those of you who may be watching that way. And we will try to get to as many of them as we can at the close. It's my tremendous pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Mary Roach, beloved best-selling science writer, author. Her newest book, Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy, is a fascinating, rollicking, occasionally surreal journey through the science, present, past, and future of reassembling the human body, part by part. Mary, welcome back to the club. Congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
let me start off by asking you something that I suspect fascinates many of your devoted readers, which is how you find your way to these places, these ideas, and these factoids, which, as you know, hit us with reactions ranging from yow to are you kidding to man, I wish I could unknow that. You throw out one of these in the book's first paragraph, which introduces us to a dining tool, Victorian era, called the masticator. So could you walk us through maybe one episode of the Roachian curiosity search that led you to that word? And yeah, tell us what it means.
Yeah. A masticator. This is going back to the very early days of dentures, and dentures were not particularly effective for chewing. They made you look like you had teeth, so they made you more presentable. It's kind of like a wig for the mouth, right? So, but you needed to chew. So there's this tool, and I was very excited when I saw a passing reference in a history of dentures, which I was reading. It was lying around the house for
As
a
one
while.
does.
As
right.
one does.
Yeah.
And there was a reference, and actually an image of a masticator. And picture, a garden pruner, handheld kind of thing. But the end of it is not scissor blades. It's kind of like there's a flat thing with a few blades, so it's sort of slicing and mashing at the same time. So it was basically teeth outside the mouth. And in the Victorian era, for guests who didn't have any teeth, you would use this. It was also, if you were the host and you wanted to, go to the table with your teeth in and you really couldn't chew with them, you would masticate in private before dinner and then go out. You'd put in the teeth, your dentures, and go out. So, and I found in fact, there are masticators in the Wellcome collection has a number of masticators. There are masticators in the British Museum. I didn't go visit one. I was kind of tempted to, try it out, but but I just I just made do with putting it in the book.
So at what point in your process do you encounter something as delightful and Roachian as a masticator? How does this get started for you? I mean, you've done this repeatedly, of course, over the last couple of decades. An idea grows strangely and in many directions. Tell us about that.
You mean for the book?
Yes.
Or
yes.
For the book. Yeah.
Yes.
I never have a book idea. I kind of start. I do it in a kind of inside out, backward way. So I have a couple of things that I think these have to be in a book, and what's the book that would go around them? And in this case, there were two things. One was a reader who wrote to me was a email saying that she was a fan of my books and that I should write a book about professional football referees, which is about as far from anything I would be doing. I don't know why. She's a big fan of the Seattle Seahawks, let's just say that. But in the conversation that ensued, she talked about she's an amputee, and she was specifically an elective amputee, and that is to say somebody whose foot was healthy in that it had a blood supply, but it was twisted. She couldn't walk on it, and she'd see people who had a prosthetic limb and who were able to hike and run, and she was like, I want that, and it was very hard for her to find someone to cut off her foot. So that was interesting, elective amputation. I was kind of interested in that. And then I thought, well, I don't know, bits and pieces of the body, maybe. And then I was talking, I contacted somebody who I was thinking about fat, which isn't in the book, but I was talking to this woman, Leah Bellis, who has a lab that deals with fat. And in the course of the conversation, my conversations are never linear with these people, because I'm picking brains, and she mentioned that she'd seen a paper by a surgeon who had used a man's middle finger to rebuild his penis after he'd had cancer. And I, of course, pictured the finger taken intact with the nail, able to beckon, just like installed as is. And that turned out not. I was like, I need to meet the surgeon, possibly the patient, and I need to. So he's in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I sent an email in English, in Russian, in Georgian, and no one wrote back. And so I called a friend who I like to travel with, and I said, so yeah, the Caucasus Mountains, they're pretty nice this time of year, and there's a guy who builds penises with fingers, so off we went. And now, now I had 2 chunks for the book, and then I thought, all right, so that's 2 potential chapters, so what are the other 15? And then there's a book. That's how it happens.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful summation of the
That's kind of how it goes. It's kind of like there used to be this ad for Kohler faucets. And the Kohler faucet ad went like this. There'd be an architect sitting in his office, and a couple would come in holding a faucet, and they would put the faucet on the desk and go, build a house around this. It's so obnoxious. But so the penis was the faucet, right? And then I guess the elective amputation was a knob.
We don't want to carry this
No,
imagery
this is not,
too far.
That's enough with that metaphor, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But that's kind of how these books mostly happen. I don't really have a book idea that I start with and then figure out from
That's
there.
a great explanation. Thank you. That clarifies, I think, for a lot of people here. I can see a lot of nods.
There you go.
Like,
Yeah.
That's how it works. Cool. Right.
Yeah.
So I'd like to start with one of the places that you start in your narrative, which is, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, xenotransplantation. Right? Xenotransplantation.
Xeno.
It's an X.
It's
so
an
it
X,
doesn't
yeah.
know whether
So,
it's
yeah,
an
you
S or
speak
a Z.
Chinese, so you got
there you go.
thrown off. Yeah.
Xenotransplantation. So tell us, first of all, sort of what took you to China to start with that. This
Sure.
is the stuff of many science fiction
Yes.
novels and movies. And so just start
Yeah.
us off on what took you to China and what were you after?
Yeah. Well, I'd heard about xenotransplantation, which you probably have seen news stories over the past couple of years.
In case they haven't, let's go back to what that actually means.
I am.
Right.
I'm doing that. I'm doing that. So, xenotransplantation. So, instead of taking an organ from a human donor, xenotransplantation, there are pigs that have been genetically edited such that there's this protein on the surface of the organ that it's like a red flag of otherness. It's just like not human. So the body just attacks, and there's this. If you were to just take a pig organ without the genetic manipulation and install it, there'd be something called hyperacute rejection. So it would just like very quickly turn black and shut down. The body would just. So if you remove that alpha-gal protein, it's called, now this organ can be implanted and not create that kind of reaction.
Let me back you up just a minute. When we use the term xeno, that doesn't refer to pigs particularly, right? It refers
No, xeno
to
is foreign.
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 Right.
Yes.
So you're looking, is there any other creature, any other non-human creature besides pigs that this is being experimented with at this time?
No.
Okay, so
No,
so
it's
we're
pigs.
talking about pigs.
It's pigs.
Okay,
and
just to
and there
clarify.
is a whole section on why pigs. We don't need to go into that, but I could just say you can blame the Hormel company partly. It's in the book. Anyway, but pigs it is. So there's this genetic edit that's done, and I was interested in the pigs. I mean, the patients are interesting too, but I was just drawn to this notion of, because the pigs have to be raised in a very, very clean environment. They are designated pathogen-free facilities, super clean. It's a super clean pigsty. So the idea of a pigsty being super clean was appealing to me. And I wanted to go, hang out with whoever cares for the pigs. And so there's two companies here in the United States, eGenesis and United Therapeutics, that are creating these pigs and these organs. And both of these folks were lovely. They set up a Zoom with the CEO, and I thought, okay, this is going well. And then they just ghosted me. One of them ghosted me, and one of them said, well, we need to check with legal. So you know where that's going. So I moved on, as I often have to do, and I looked around it's probably on PubMed, and I found a researcher in China who's worked on xenotransplantation for 30 years now. And China actually turned out to be an appropriate setting for the chapter because there's no cultural tradition of organ donation.
No cultural tradition.
No. The researcher...
Human organ donation.
Yeah, human organ donation, correct. The researcher explained it to me as, your body and your organs are a gift from your ancestors, and you don't mess with them, among other things. Anyway, so it seemed like a fitting place for the chapter because there's obviously a huge need for organs. The only supply that really exists is political prisoners and death row prisoners, and they say that they have a donor program, but do they? Do they though? So anyway, that's how I ended up in China. I wasn't my first choice. I often bounce around. I think I'm going somewhere, and then it doesn't work out, and so you.
And what were you actually seeing in China by way of progress in the program?
Yeah, well, I had imagined, which is silly, I imagined like going into the designated pathogen-free facility, but I'm covered in pathogen. I mean, I'm a human being. Human beings are just walking pathogen farms. I've got bacteria and probably some fungi and God knows what else growing on me. So we drove a couple of hours outside Chengdu, and we kind of pulled over in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, have we had a flat tire? What are we doing? And they pointed across a river, and there was this facility, and they went, the pigs are there. So I basically flew all the way to China to not see any pigs. I did, though, because they took me to the control center nearby, and there were it's like a big display with video displays of the pigs, what they're doing. Then they're in there being pigs, and and you look at the enclosure, there's some pig crap. It's very clean pig crap because the food is irradiated, but they're pigs, and it's a pigsty.
And to what extent, where is the process right now? To what extent are these pigs actually now donating?
Well,
forcefully.
The U.S. is actually, you're right, they're not. Yeah.
They're not exactly donating, right?
Yeah. Nobody had a meeting with the pigs.
Correct.
So the U.S. is actually ahead in that they are heading in. eGenesis, one of the U.S. firms, started, I think it was this month, a clinical trial toward FDA approval. The organs will have to have approval, but they already have. United Therapeutics has a U kidney and a U heart. You like the U? Yeah, they've got a name for it. So when that is approved, they'll move forward. So far, there have been 5 or 6 kidney heart patients. The initial patients were the very, very ill. They were folks who it was a compassionate care exception to the even though the organs aren't approved, they were allowed to try it. So, and they lived a couple of months, so there's still some kinks to be worked out. But there's a patient who was in better shape, and he's going on, I think, 9 months now with a pig kidney.
Pig kidney.
A pig knee.
Did,
I just made, that's not the real,
ow.
it's not the real name.
Why does this give so many of us, including those of us who like bacon and carnitas, the creeps? Right?
I think because of there was a Margaret Atwood book that had to do with pigs being, used to grow kidneys. It's a very Margaret Atwood kind of thing, isn't it?
Well, anybody who has read the Kazuo Ishiguro novel, Never Let Me Go, which is about a science fiction novel, of course, about humans being raised for this very purpose, that would be brought to mind. But I think it's fair to say, and among this nodding crowd as well, that even if one is a carnivore, this is creepy. And that's the technical scientific term for what it is. And you, having explored it, did you ever get into conversations with people about this, or conversations in your own head?
I talked with the surgeon who did the first pig heart transplant, Mohammed Muad'Din, and he's Muslim, and I said, so how are people of your faith reacting? Not to mention people of the Jewish religion, and there's a paper where faith leaders of these various faiths were interviewed, and the consensus was, as he put it, because I initially said, why pigs? Could you use a llama? Whatever. Anyway, that's the Hormel story. And he said, yeah, you could use something else. And he said, if you want to give me a few $1 million, we can try to start from scratch. But at this point, it's pigs, because so much is known about pigs and how the pig heart compares, the function of the pig heart versus the human heart. All of that has been studied through the Hormel Institute, working with the Mayo Foundation back in the middle of the last century. So that's why pigs. And he said that, believe me, I hear from people every day who would love for it not to be pigs, meaning faith leaders. But the consensus was to use his line, I'm not eating it, I'm saving lives with it. So
that saving life exception is true, and of course both in Islam and in Judaism.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I personally feel like we should strike a deal with pigs and say, look, we're going to stop eating you, but some of you are going to give us some organs. Does that seem better? Because it's just a lot for pigs. I don't know. I feel bad for the pigs.
There's another word that pops up in this context that sounds like you invented it, but you didn't. I'm going to pronounce this probably wrong. Chimerism?
Oh, chimerism.
Chimerism.
Nice try.
Chimerism. Thank you.
That
pig
side
can grow your personal organ.
Yeah. That is heading into a very strange sci-fi territory.
Explain what's up with that, please.
Yeah, chimerism would be a pig that is literally growing a human organ, and the way that you start with the blastocyst, just a few cells, and you genetically edit them in such a way that there's this animal is not going to grow its own kidney. Now you introduce some human stem cells, and they're going to go fill that niche. So the pig will be growing a human, say, kidney, and the pig, because it's always been part of the pig won't reject it, and now you transplant it, and the person won't reject it. I mean, this is just...
Yeah, where is this?
Yes.
Where is
well,
this now?
Apparently a rat grew a mouse kidney or vice versa. So that's where it's at. So it's at the very infancy. And you can find papers on like the ethics of it, like what if the cells aren't just limited to the kidney? What if they make their way to the brain and the pig starts to have human intelligence? And now it's like that, Oh, Lucky Man, did you see that? Like that film? Oh, yeah. With like... Anyway, that's getting into pretty weird terrain, chimerism. So the end point being in the sci-fi movie, you would all have your own personal pig growing spare parts, like a car in the backyard that you use for
and you
parts.
raise in one tiny little, oh my God, sort of subclause, what if you actually get some brain cells mixed up in there and the pig starts to develop human agency
Right.
at the same time that it's growing your organ, right?
Yes.
Okay, there's nothing to be said about that except yikes, right? At this moment?
Yes.
Okay.
There's nothing to be said about that, but yeah.
Yeah, we've taken care of that. Now, those of you who are familiar with Mary's work know that one of the coolest things she does is she just drops footnotes on you. And I thought it would be a
Not
good
your typical footnote.
breather.
Not the kind that you want to skip.
This is so, a couple of occasions in this evening, we're going to just go, okay, she's talking about things, and we're going to go, footnote. And not that this has to do with pigs, but it's a very Rochian kind of footnote. And yeah, I would like you to read this one, please.
This one. Okay.
Don't look
All right.
for a sensible segue here, because as is Mary's style, sometimes you may not
Well,
find
this
one.
is, yeah, well, it has to do with nasal mutilation used to be, it was a popular punishment in centuries past because, well, it's quite punishing, but also because it would serve as a deterrent because it's there in the middle of your face and everybody sees it. Okay, so, and apparently there was an entire town that was denosed as a punishment. Okay, when the town of Kirtipur, Nepal finally fell to Churka invaders in 1767, the holdouts' punishment, the story goes, took the form of mass nasal mutilation. All 865 male residents lost their noses, with exceptions made for those who played wind instruments. This last bit puzzled me. Surely one can play a wind instrument without the exterior of their nose. I ran this by the composer and jazz clarinetist David Rothenberg, whom I happened to have recently met. His reply included a link to the paper Changes in Dentofacial Morphology Induced by Wind Instruments in Professional Musicians, a systematic review. Playing a wind instrument can apparently be its own form of facial mutilation, bringing on, among other things, receding gums, bone remodeling, reduced facial length, thickened skin, acute pulpitis, lip lesions, overbite, herniated soft palate, Satchmo syndrome, recurring tartar, and saliva stagnation.
Okay, that's just for your general information, and for all the flautists and tuba players are out there, I'm sorry to give you bad dreams tonight, but it's So take us to Mongolia.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how many people here have had cataract surgery. I happen to have just had one. So I had to call Mary as I was reading the book, being like, come on, girl, you know I'm recovering from a cataract surgery right now, and here we are in Mongolia among eye surgeons. Tell us how you got there.
Okay. So I guess this is what happened. I was on either LinkedIn or Instagram or back in the day before it was X, Twitter, and I was just poking around for some kind of take on cataracts, and I wrote to this eye surgeon who is active on Twitter /X, and he said, you ought to go out with the Flying Eye Hospital. And that's irresistible bait for me, because the idea of a hospital that flies is kind of surreal, and the fact that it's an eye hospital. So I got in touch with the Orbis International, who own the Flying Eye Hospital, and they were going to Mongolia. And you don't need to go to Mongolia for a chapter on cataracts. It's not really necessary, but it was really interesting. And then their approach is they don't do the kind that's done now, which is phacoemulsification, where you basically use sound wave to turn the lens into a chowder that you can suck out through a tiny opening. They do a bigger opening, and they remove the whole lens in one piece, and you can do it with very basic instruments.
Pretty much in the field.
Yeah,
I guess, right?
Well, in a rural hospital, just sort of like a table. I think the only thing plugged in was the microscope eyepiece. And you can put the same kind of, the lenses are folded up like a taco shell, and they go in and they pop open. It's kind of inspiring, just because their whole approach is, we don't go in and do 25 surgeries a day. We go in and we train the surgeons. The Flying Eye Hospital is a teaching hospital, teaching classroom with all this equipment that So they can train surgeons in these small cities or even more rural areas to do this with affordable equipment, and that way just have the biggest impact. And so I saw this herder come in, among this nomadic herder, and they, removed the lens hole, and it was kind of amazing. And they just sort of like rubbed it on a piece of gauze when they were, and I was like, whoa, it's a human lens. And I folded over the gauze and I put it in my pocket. And my host, who's a surgeon, saw me, and he said afterwards, if you leave the country with that lens, you're in violation of human trafficking, and you can get this hospital shut down. I'm like, okay, here, sorry. I'm like, it's a lens. You're going to throw that away. It's like a human lens.
You had an amazing story in there as you were explaining the development of cataract surgery, about how they discovered what kind of material would not set off immune reaction in eyes.
Yeah.
Tell us the war story. It's a literal war story.
It's a literal war story, yeah. The Royal Air Force surgeon, Harold Ridley, in World War II was like, we have pilots, that when the canopy is smashed for whatever, like by a bullet or whatever, a crash, and little fragments of plexiglass get into the eye. He realized the eye is tolerating that pretty well, and it's less problematic for the patient to just leave that in there. And he thought, it seems like, because they weren't able in the past to find, a way to get around the eye, reacting to this foreign material. So he's like, well, so let's try plexiglass. Let's try a lens made out of plexiglass. And they did, and it worked, which is so much better than hundreds of years ago. I mean, cataract surgery is ancient, but what they're...
This also came as a big surprise to this reader, at any rate, that people have been doing cataract surgery for hundreds of years.
Just
Explain.
basically, like the patient sits in a chair, the surgeon, who has a sharp stick, sticks it in the eye.
This is the part I got real upset about when I was...
It's sort of like no anesthesia here. Well, how much does the interior of the eye feel? I don't know. But anyway, psychologically, not fun. So impales the lens and pushes it down. It's called couching, from the French se coucher, to lie down. Pushes it down to the bottom of the eye. And this is from a 12th century medical manual. It is held there for 4 to 5 paternosters, our fathers. So I thought that was an appropriate way to count off the amount of time that you're going to hold it down there, so it'll kind of settle and stay there. Because if you let a cataract go long enough, it just blocks all light, and so that people are blind. So if you do that couching, and there's no infection and all the other horrible things that might happen from sticking a stick in the eye, at least the light is coming in, and then that the patient can see shapes and colors, not in focus, but it's much better than it was. So anyway,
just knowing that procedure, as is the case with a number of your other stories about replacement parts, they have histories that go back far beyond what you might imagine.
Right.
Let's switch gears to talk about bioprinting. Okay. What was initially imagined with 3D printers, and what might transpire in the human part replacement?
Well, I think just because there's a lot of kind of hype out there in the tech press world, and I kind of imagined, aren't we just printing everything up and popping it in? And I went to Carnegie Mellon, that has a really good bioprinting lab, the Feinberg Lab. And I said, how far away is we're going to just print that out and pop it in? He said, well, we're kind of in the Wright brothers stage, if you compare it to aviation. So, and when I was there, they were working on just printing muscle, which sounds pretty simple. Like, just print those cells, right? Just print it out. But it depends on what the muscle's function is. If it's a hamstring muscle, you have to print them, align them in parallel. And if it's the shoulder muscle, the deltoid, it's like a fan shape. You got to print them. So the cells have to be aligned according to the function of the muscle. The heart muscle kind of twists actually a little bit as it pumps. It's kind of like wringing out a shirt. So you're printing it on a helix shape. So, and then you've got to think about, okay, how are you going to feed these cells? Are you going to print a vasculature? Is the body going to kind of grow that on its own? How do you do that? Nobody's printing nerves. So it's so complex, but it is a printer. I mean, I saw them printing out. I mean, it's like a 4-color, just different extruder heads. This one's doing the collagen, this one's doing the live cells, and it's doing its thing. But it's, I think that they were very excited about a single mouse ventricle. So it's one ventricle of a heart in a mouse that was pumping, that it was working on. And I was like, whoa, you've got a mouse that's living on. She goes, no, we left the heart in.
Right.
So the ventricle, we don't have valves on it, so the blood spurts out either end. So, it's not there yet, but it's, we can print a valve, we can get it, so it's the Wright brothers phase.
You've got a fascinating explanation here also of what you describe, or what the scientists describe as decelling.
Yeah.
And why it's so hard to reverse it. There's a paragraph I'd like you to read, but explain what is meant by decelling and why it's so important to do in this kind of printing.
There's decell, recell was the great hope, which is, so if you could take a heart, and there are these ghost hearts online. It's like it's just the extracellular material. It's like a white heart. So what has happened there is you would pump in using the vasculature, all the veins, arteries, capillaries, you pump like an embalmer would do. So you're getting it to all the cells. You pump in detergent. Detergent breaks down lipids. So these cells break open because the outside of the cell is lipids, and it breaks open. And you can essentially wash away the cellular material, and you're left with extracellular material.
Which you don't want to have, because it's going to complicate the insertion into a new being, the cellular material, right?
Well, nobody does decell, recell.
Okay.
What the problem? It doesn't work because the stuff that you're rinsing away is tiny. It's tiny molecules, and if you try to then use that same system to put cells in, they're much bigger. But they're not going to get, and also you got multiple types of cells. How do you get them to get off the train in the right place? So there was a lot of excitement about decell, recell, and that was what inspired the head of the lab to get into this field, but it's turned out not to be feasible.
And when they tell you we're in the Wright brothers stage, do they tell you what they imagine will be the first parts that can actually be printed, and what actual use will be able to
there is one. There's a exterior of an ear, not the interior hearing part, but the exterior, and that is approved and in use. You'd think cartilage, because you think that's, cartilage is just one type of cell. It's like it doesn't have to have nerves, but and you can print it. But he said it's not as strong and durable as it needs to be. It looks like it, looks like it, sounds like it, smells like it, but it doesn't function. You try to stitch it in, and the stitches pull through, and so. It just hasn't turned out to be as simple. You would think something that's like cartilage would be available already.
Right.
But, yeah.
Okay. Footnote break. Here comes another. Here comes another random Rochian footnote. This is in part of the chapter that discusses vaginal reconstruction from internal body parts. And this note, she's made a mention of an early 1900s surgeon, again, this goes back a long way more than you might imagine, who's contemplating the request of a cancer patient, a woman, who has insisted that despite the still experimental, in the 1900s, nature of the procedure, she has to have her vagina reconstructed, quote, or her husband would desert her.
Okay,
And
footnote.
I think this is my favorite footnote in the whole book, I have to say.
Stewart, he's the surgeon. Stewart, unsure, had asked 5 of his colleagues to examine the patient and weigh in. Quote, all unhesitatingly took sides with her, he writes, one of the gentlemen stating that any operation destined to preserve the marital relations and keep the home intact was not only justifiable but mandatory. And here we see how the anus can be used as a substitute for the male brain.
I noticed the men are laughing harder than
Yeah.
End footnote. Okay, prosthetic limbs.
Yes.
This is another category of replaceable parts that we maybe think of as familiar. There are
Yeah.
very likely people in this room who have a prosthetic limb or live with somebody who does. But you bring surprises to this as well. And so I guess the first question I want to ask is, what startled you as you immersed yourself in this world of people who have had amputations and are very serious about how they want to proceed?
What startled me the most about the world of amputations?
Well,
Or
of prosthetics and where the issues are in prosthetics right now.
well, I didn't know. And my image of a prosthetic, say, leg, was basically a pirate's peg leg, like you would have and it's not also, no one says stump now, it's a residual limb. I had to be corrected at the Amputee Coalition conference. By the way, Mary, we don't use the word stump.
Noted.
Noted. Although there is a group here, Stumps Are Us. So there's some people like it. Anyway, so I just like the wooden bucket that you stick, which is ridiculous. There's a lot of what keeps prosthetists, the people who deal with fitting people with prosthetic limbs and do some design work as well. It's all about because the socket can, you're putting this residual limb into this receptacle, and it has to be it's staying on by compression. So it can be uncomfortable. There can be rubbing. It has to fit just perfectly. There's a lot of sweating. There are actually residual limb antiperspirants. If you could just screw the prosthetic into the bone the way dental implants are screwed into the jaw, that would be great. And there is something called osseointegration, which does just that. And it was started by the same guy, Per Ingemar Brainmark, if I'm pronouncing it right, who the person who first came up with dental implants, because he's like, this is great, and the mouth is full of bacteria, and yet we don't have infections. It's amazing. So how hard could it be to do a leg? But the infection thing has not been worked out. There've been some really multiple sequential infections that people have had, so that it hasn't caught on in that way. And I know that the mouth is kind of amazing. I had a saliva chapter in Gulp, and saliva has, among other things, antibacterial properties, which it needs to, because your mouth is it's a cesspool.
But I think one of the stopping on that just for a second. One of the things that at least I, as a reader, was struck by was, I think there's a common media-driven image now of the tremendous advances in prosthetics.
Yes, right.
That they can do amazing things that no one had ever imagined.
Right? The kind of
and you're
cyborg
telling us
arms.
that a lot of people who actually use these devices are like,
Yeah, they're
not practical.
Most I think it's a majority, or 40-something% of people who have an arm amputation don't use anything. They use their other arm. I was walking around the Amputee Coalition with this woman Judy Berna, the football enthusiast, and there was a booth selling those the sort of cyborgy looking hands that have grips, that when it's holding a raspberry. And she laughed and said, yeah, you're going to spend 35 seconds positioning that. No, you're going to reach over with your other hand and pick it up. And the other thing that I saw there was people with the body powered, the harness with it's like they're hooks, but they also come apart, so you can grasp and you can carry things. And you see somebody who has those, and it's very much like they were reaching up, adjusting their COVID mask, gesturing with them, and it was very fluid, and there wasn't any hesitation. And they're very simple. It's leather and straps, and then the metal graspers.
Did you feel there, or perhaps in other areas that you were exploring, the tension between what is practical and actually usable for human beings and what is exciting
Yes.
to researchers
Yes.
and scientists?
Well, For sure, yeah. Judy, the amputee, she said, I cannot tell you the number of times somebody forwards an email to me that says, look, here's a 3D printed limb where it's $25 and you'll never have to visit a prosthetist. And she said, that is never going to happen. My friends mean well, but I wish they would cut it out. Because there's, it's cool to see, like, oh, here's this limb, and you can kind of think it into certain motions, which is pretty cool. And it the Wright brothers thing again, down the line a ways, it probably will work quickly, and it won't just be a menu that you kind of toggle through. But right now they're very heavy, they're very expensive. They have a battery that has to stay charged. They're not waterproof. There's a woman who writes a lot about this named Britt Young, and she said, I'm more disabled with that arm on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to switch Mary style to hair.
Okay.
Okay. Tell us the saga of your failed hair donation
Yeah.
to a hair library.
Oh, yes, well, hair, okay, I wanted to create an example for people of the principle that makes hair transplants work, which is donor dominance, okay? So if you take hair from the sides and the back of the head, that's not hair that falls out with male pattern baldness. So you can take that, put it up top, won't fall out. It retains the characteristics of its homeland, right? And there's been studies done looking at not just at heads, but the original hair transplanter, Seiji Okuda, I have seen the Okuda papers, and he was moving hair everywhere. He was like taking chest hair and making mustaches. He was moving head hair down to the pubic region for pubic alopecia, which is a thing, and you can treat it that way. The thing is, though, you then will need to trim it every few months because it's head hair. And you can take, there's a clinic in Southern California that actually took chest hair, armpit hair, pubic hair to the head. The complaint or the disadvantage that they mentioned in the paper was that it is difficult to style.
You can feel you could feel that.
But I wanted
Wait, there's one story I'd like
Yeah.
you to tell about, again, historical origins. Who knew that hair transplants went back this far? But Mary points out that the original hair transplanter was the Japanese researcher that she just referred to. But the American, he was American or British? I can't remember.
I think he was American.
Yes.
Yes.
Talk about, you have a sort of, oh my God, I was about to say hair raising. Please forgive me. an eye-opening story about his initial hair transplant experiments and how they were received. Tell us that story.
Yeah, no, he, and I don't think he had seen, I think this he hadn't seen the Okuda papers. There was kind of like two people kind of came
What
up
era
on this.
are we in here? We're
50s, I want to
Okay.
say, yeah.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, we'd have to fact check that. I can't remember, but anyway, middle of the last century. So he did this. He transplanted a number of hairs from the back of the head to the top, and my God, they stayed in and they didn't fall out, and it was working. And he did it on he spent years before he actually presented it to a dermatological conference, and then he did finally come out and say, look, this is working, and these men still have the hair. And people booed. Everybody said hair on the top of the head will fall out. It's just going to fall out eventually. But he's like, no, it's from back here, donor dominance. So no, I felt bad for him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
imagine, right? I've got this great thing. It's going to change American, anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, I donated some follicles to, there's a company in Southern California that had been trying to create follicles from stem cells, and they were doing basic research on how do follicles grow and how do they go from, the basic building blocks to the actual tube where the hair comes out. And so they were collecting follicles, and I volunteered to donate to science. I donated a dozen. I have a little tiny bald spot right here. So while they were at it, I said, would you mind very much if you took one of those follicular units, which has a couple of follicles, and you put it on my leg so that I can show people. By the time the book comes out and I'm on book tour, I should have like long flowing hair on my leg. And like they did it, I think, because it's easier to transplant a follicle than to argue with a nitwit. So they did it, and sadly it didn't take.
It didn't
There's
take.
a not. The head has a very robust blood supply, and that was his excuse. The
You've
leg
got
does
a
not.
reference in there to feeling as though this is part of the future of this kind of science. Explain why that is.
Wait,
hair,
what?
Hair as the future.
Oh,
Yeah.
hair is the future.
That is not a line from this book,
Well-
I promise you, but there's a thought.
Well,
Yeah.
I chose this particular lab.
Hair shafts, excuse me, I'm going to fact check myself and Mary here, that a certain kind of experimentation of the hair shafts is, quote, the likely future of medicine.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Not hair shafts, but
Okay.
the
cells, right.
Pluripotent stem cells.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with a follicle because I thought this is pretty simple, right? Nothing is simple. But I was thinking, okay, how hard could it be to grow a follicle from stem cells? Can't be that hard. Turns out, incredibly hard. But anyway, my point was, like, if we could do if you could grow a follicle, one day we'll be growing everything from. I mean, it is kind of the future right now. What's being done with stem cells, either induced pluripotent stem cells, which is, patient by patient, you take blood cells, regress them to this infancy where they have the potential to become to pretty much anything, and you instruct them to become what you want them to be. And you could do that with, say, the neurons that produce dopamine. And if you could, introduce, so I'm not saying we're not anywhere near whole organs, but if you just have like a cluster of cells, that could be great for Parkinson's or for diabetics, So, and those trials are going on now.
When you were looking at potential subjects for this book, was there anything that you imagined, besides, for example, bioprinting, was there anything you imagined would be much farther along than it actually is? Or would be an actual practice that turned out not to be the case?
I think that, it's this, because you hear, there's so many press releases now, there's things like, and this is an actual headline, lab-grown penises are on the horizon. And I'm like, run! And I contacted the university that had issued the press release, and I'm like, and this was, it was like 2019 or something that this press release came out, and I'm like, so those penises, are they still out there on the horizon? Where are they? And, there's a lot of, just a lot of kind of really excited overstatement that happens, I think. Or it's something that was in, there was in fact, the same university, there was a lot of excitement about a lab-grown anus, and they'd put it in a rabbit, and the rabbit was they were looking at, his fur doesn't have fecal staining.
Hold please. A lab-grown human anus that they placed in?
Rabbit
anus.
Rabbit
thank you.
anus.
Okay.
Yeah. No humans are receiving rabbit anuses.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank
No.
God. Yes.
No. Yeah. So, and I was like, wow, well, that, an anal sphincter, that's kind of an impressive thing. And I contacted the university, and they said, oh, well, the researcher retired. And I said, well, did nobody else pick up that work? I mean, anal incontinence, there's a lot of people who struggle with that. Seems like you'd want to carry that forward. She said, well, I can't speak to why that hadn't happened. So I think because to talk about aligning muscles, like for like something that contracts, like an anus, that's like a really complicated cellular alignment to do that. You've got like a bunch of rings around, like in a circle on a bigger, just like that's not easy to do.
Right.
And I don't know what those rabbits had, but I'm not thinking it was quite as spectacular as what you and I have going back there.
Was there one of the things that you are known for in your books is what we might call participatory research?
Yeah.
Which we see, of course, in this narrative in ways that you will find out, those of you who haven't had the pleasure yet of reading the book. Was there anything you really wanted to do jump into, participate in, that turned out to be just implausible, impractical?
Well, I before I did the leg hair thing, I wanted to, because my eyebrows are really thin at my age, right? So I was like, I asked it's a clinic in New York, could you transplant a couple pubic hairs, just because I thought that would have been to my eyebrow, because in that case it'd be kind of the right length, and it would be sort of a novelty.
The problem is that nobody who has drinks with you would ever be able to look below your eyes again. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, they were very, very lovely, but they said no. They said no. What did I want to do for this? I didn't want to have anything cut off. I didn't want to. No, I wasn't really. I don't think there was anything that I wanted to get implanted, or I'm trying to think.
You will
now.
see her. You will follow her as she climbs into an iron lung and
Oh yes.
climbs out real fast. But yeah.
Hey, I
that's
was
part-
in there 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
I was
It's
gonna
true.
say.
It's
and that
true.
was that was amazing. But I'm not somewhere. I wanted to spend the night in it and have a meal, and you'll see in the.
So
book.
we're going to turn to some of your questions now. Mary, I want to tell you, will of course be signing books afterward, and please discuss the tissue donation.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
okay. So anybody who buys a book, while supplies last, I'm a tissue donor tonight. These are tissue packets that say the name of the book. So I am a tissue donor, and everybody gets a little packet.
It's
of
lame,
tissue.
but it works.
It's
right?
not lame.
It's lame.
It's so clever.
Listen to them groaning, honey child. Okay.
Those look like checks.
Starting with your questions, they do look like checks. Starting with your questions, here's one. Can you talk more about the growing market for skin substitutes? Did you grow increasingly wary of medical marketing, or more helpful about biotech innovation as a result of the reporting?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, there was a big investigative piece in the
Thank
New
you for
York.
that good question.
Yes, in the New York Times about how much money is spent on these skin substitutes, which are essentially biodressings. They're being put in place on mostly second-degree burns that heal pretty well on their own, and there are much cheaper alternatives. Cadaver grafts work really well. They're even like Mepilex, which is an antibacterial foam, works pretty well. You can use it for Icelandic cod. You can use foreskins, embryonic cells, and there's a lot of hype about what that does, et cetera. But what it mostly does is kind of bankrupt Medicare, because it's not just for burns, but it's also for from diabetic foot ulcers that are very difficult to heal. And there's a tendency to charge a lot. I mean, they're way more expensive. Mepilex is $10. Cod skin is $1,000. That's kind of, and this was pointed out to me by a surgeon at Mass General, which is one of the main biggest burn units in the country. It's like cadaver skin works really well, and it's temporary. You're going to take that off, and ultimately what you want is the patient's own skin, an autograft. That's what you're going to use. But if you've got a major burn, serious burn, you don't have a lot of real estate to work with, so you want to cover it up to keep the moisture in. There's various reasons to use a biodressing, but to call it a skin substitute is apparently Medicare spends more on those than on anesthesia or MRIs.
Wow.
It's a huge not fraud, but bilking.
Wow.
I would say.
Yeah. Thank you for that good question. Yeah. Question, what happens with the parts of the pig that aren't implanted?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Actually, this alpha-gal knockout, they're called alpha because they've knocked out that alpha-gal protein. And for people who have a sensitivity or an allergy to alpha-gal, that pork is actually it's approved, FDA approved. I mean, you can eat it. So it is an exciting thing if you have an alpha-gal allergy.
And I don't know if any of you read the article a couple of weeks back about how bad a particular tick-borne virus is in New England.
Yes.
Which is causing dramatic alpha-gal allergies in people, causing them to lose their capacity to eat meat.
To eat meat.
animal
So
products. Yeah.
I tried to get a price check on alpha-gal knockout pork, and they said it's not yet for sale. But it is approved. So there you go.
There's part of the answer.
So hopefully the rest of the pig would not be wasted. Anyway.
This person asks a question that I thought about a lot as I was reading this one. The person says, exploring topics such as decomposing dead bodies, pooping in space, finger penis transplants, you appear to have an incredibly high tolerance for gross and gore. I think that could be, that goes without saying. The questioner asks, has anything tested your limits or been too much for you? And I want to add a thought to that, which is, in this book particularly, you have some situations which are pretty delicate. You're in front of people who are really suffering, or a cadaver, where you've been in contact with the family of the deceased person, and you have to maintain your both narrative and your yourself. How does that work for you? How do you do that?
Are we doing gross first?
We could do gross first.
Gross first, or okay?
We could do gross first.
Have I ever
and
encountered
then
something
sorrowful.
that was beyond what I could cope with?
Yes.
No.
Not a
No.
normal person.
Well, once, but it had nothing to do with reporting. I am friends with Judy Melanik, who is a medical examiner, formerly in Alameda County. Now she's active on TikTok, and she's very interesting. But and we used to meet for fish tacos after she finished her autopsy. But she one morning decided she was going to test the limits, just like what you're talking about. And so she said, "Mary, we have an interesting case in the morgue, and I'm not going to even say anything." But I definitely left the room
There you go.
quickly. But it was the smell. So yes, I have a limit. There is a cutoff point. It's just a little further along than the average person, maybe. Yeah.
And so to the second question,
Yeah.
which goes to a combination of reportorial curiosity and dedication, also respect,
Yeah.
delicacy when appropriate,
Right.
humor when appropriate.
Yeah.
What have you learned about how to manage that?
Well, I'm very aware of, I mean, since Stiff was a book about cadaver research, and I was very aware that, what if the reader had recently lost someone? How is this book? So I have that in the back of my head, but I also always assume that my editor's not like me. She's a poet, she's a novelist, she's lovely, she's very well dressed and clean, and so there's from time to time Jill will step in and say that I've crossed a line. The only example that I have is from Bonk, which is about sexual physiology, and it's kind of a long story. I don't know.
I bet you could condense it, because I know all of a sudden everybody's on the edge of their chair like, tell us the story, Mary.
Well, okay, so there was a researcher who had published a lot of papers on the reflexes of sexual intercourse. He's in Cairo, and I thought, what is he even talking about? So I wrote to him, and I said, could I come and visit? And he said, yes, and I could arrange a demonstration. I was like, whoa, okay, heading to Cairo. And I got there, and he said, the volunteers for this demonstration have declined to do this. Big surprise. He said, but I can show you, I have another reflex I can show you. And he had a man come in and stand kind of on a stool so that his butt was eye level. And he was demonstrating, Dr. Shafiq was demonstrating the anal wink, which is like if you scratch the side of the anus, it winks, like winks. And that's fine, that's in the book. But then I did this riff on, because you're looking through this and it's eye level, and there's, I don't know if you remember those sugar Easter eggs with the opening, and you look through and there's like a bunny and little chicks, and I went on this whole thing that's what I was imagining, and my editor just put a line through it.
Thank you, editor.
She wrote, no. So every now and then I go too far, but I try to poke fun at myself. I'm always the clueless idiot, because I am. I don't know. I show up places I really don't know a lot, and I'm eager to learn, but I say ridiculous things. I get into a armored personnel carrier and I go, oh, it's great that they they have cup holders. That's great. He goes, Mary, those are rifle holders. I'm like, I try to, the humor, I try to be sure the humor is not at the expense of the people in the book, but myself, or just the weirdness of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt that you pulled that off beautifully in this
Well,
one.
thank you.
I hope you
Yeah,
will feel
thank
that
you.
way
I mean,
as well.
humor and sensitivity are awkward bedfellows.
There are places where you're going to find yourself going, okay, right, almost, but
Yeah.
no. I want to wind up by going back to you and your text, because the tone that you wind this up with is one of so much humility in the face of the wondrousness of the
Yeah.
human body, as opposed to the science itself.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I'd like you to tell us briefly the story about discovering what could and could not be done with something as simple seeming as human tears
Sure, yeah.
and teeth tartar.
Yeah.
And then I'd like you to read us your closing
Okay.
paragraph, if you would. So,
Sure. Yeah, no, I as this book went along, I had I began to feel like is there any part of the body that we can create a substitute that is as good as what you start out with? And I don't mean if you have a deformity or you have a disability or where you can make it better. You can when something goes wrong, you can make it better. But can you really create something that is as good as what nature gives you? And I thought, okay, what's the simplest thing? What about tears? And I found this guy who had spent decades of his life trying to create an artificial tear, or specifically the tear film, which is the protective layer of the eye. And we got on the phone, and it was 2 45-minute free Zoom, because I'm too cheap to pay for Zoom. Everybody else sends me a link. So we did 2 45-minute on the tear film, and he was talking about, it has this amazing structure, the glycocalyx, which is like a scaffold that holds the layers, like the layers in, keeps them constant so they're not mixing up, so that, the moisture is held in, and there's mucins that are trapping debris and dumping it in the corner of the eye, that sleep snot that you wake up with. There's lubricin, which is this amazing lubricating substance that's impossible to, you can't create that molecule. And I said, so artificial tears, they're no good. He goes, well, yeah, an hour or two, they help, but they kind of just wash away the good stuff. So not even a tear, really, can we recreate in the way that.
and tooth tartar.
And tooth tartar,
And
yeah.
tooth tartar. What's
Yeah.
the problem with
Well,
making
enamel, not tartar.
Tooth enamel. I beg
Yeah.
your pardon. Tooth enamel. What's
You
the
could probably
problem with
make
making
tartar, but you don't
probably
want
could.
that.
No, you don't. What's the problem with making enamel? It seems so
It's
straightforward.
very, very hard, and you can create it, but it needs to be done at a very, very high temperature. And then also, how do you incorporate it? The woman, again, she spent 2 decades, and she said she's created this artificial material, like artificial enamel, but it's too thin to be applied in a dental clinic. It's not practical. But instead, they're using this technology to create, better helmets. Like so instead of, technology creating a body part, it's a body part inspiring technology.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. Which is a lovely segue into what I'd like you to do is just read the last paragraphs of the book, please, starting right here.
50 years from now, I have no doubt, all the glittering promise in all the chapters here, the materials and devices and technologies or techniques will have been realized. The benefits will have been teased apart from the risks, the processing regulated and scaled up, the costs lowered enough for insurers to cover. Put your arrow over it. Lowered enough for insurers to cover. Expect miracles, just don't expect them overnight. And don't expect too much of them. You can replace many of your original parts, and the replacements will improve in time, as they have already, in astonishing ways. But the pieces science builds and grows and prints and scavenges won't ever quite equal the ones we start out with. There's not a complaint or a condemnation or belittlement of the progress that's been made. It's just me saying something we all know but regularly lose sight of. The body's all-day, everyday achievements, the architectural brilliance of cartilage or tooth enamel, the effortless autofocus of the eye, a heartbeat so committed it persists outside a body. These are the real miracles. That's where the gee whiz belongs.
Thank you. Our great thanks to Mary Roach, the author of Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy, and
And
of course,
Cynthia Gorney.
we encourage you to pick up a copy here at your local bookstore. And for information about the Commonwealth Club, World Affairs membership, and upcoming programs, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.